When modern anthropologists look at ancient Rome, they see an empire that supposedly conquered dirt. These were the brilliant minds who invented the aqueduct, brought indoor plumbing to the masses, and built massive cathedral-like public baths. By all logic, they should have been the cleanest, healthiest people in the ancient world. But a few years ago, archaeologists started digging into ancient Roman sewers and examining coprolites, which is the scientific term for fossilized human poop. What they found completely shattered the illusion. Despite all their baths and plumbing, Roman guts were absolutely crawling with whipworms, roundworms, and dysentery. In fact, the parasite load in the Roman Empire was actually higher than it was in the Bronze Age, before toilets were even invented. To make matters worse, one of their favorite condiments was garum, a fermented fish sauce that they poured on almost everything. This sauce was often made by leaving fish innards out in the sun for months, creating a massive superhighway for fish tapeworms to enter the human digestive tract. I'm Cave Guy, and today we're scrubbing away the marble facade. We are going to look at how the Romans bathed, how they survived their exploding toilets, and how they handled the realities of human biology. Imagine building the greatest plumbing system the world had ever seen, and then turning it into a spectacular biohazard. Let's dig in. Number 1. The bathing illusion and the Hippocaust. To understand the Roman hygiene paradox, we have to start at the thermae, the public baths. Going to the baths was a daily requirement for everyone across the empire. It was part gym, part spa, part business center, and part food court. The engineering behind these buildings was genuinely genius. They were heated by a system called a hypocaust. Fires were kept burning underground by enslaved workers, sending blistering hot air circulating through hollow spaces beneath the floors and inside the walls. But once you got into the actual water, the genius ended and the grossness began. To understand the chaos of the baths, we actually have a primary source. The Roman philosopher Seneca once lived directly above a public bathhouse, and he wrote a letter complaining bitterly about the racket. He described the aggressive grunting of men lifting heavy stone weights, the loud slapping sounds of massage therapists working on clients, the screaming of people having their armpit hair plucked out, and the constant yelling of sausage and pastry vendors hawking their food over the noise. It was incredibly loud, chaotic, and completely packed. And they didn't have soap. Soap as we know it, made from rendered animal fats and lye, was a Gallic invention that Romans mostly viewed as a weird hair dye used by barbarians. So how do you get clean without soap? You use a kitchen ingredient. Romans slathered their bodies in cheap olive oil. The oil would bind to the sweat, the dirt, the dead skin, and the dust of the streets. Then, an attendant would use a specialized curved metal tool called a strigil. They violently scraped off the filthy gray oil sludge, and then they got into the communal pools. You'd move through the tepidarium, warm room, the caldarium, steaming hot room, and plunge into the frigidarium, freezing cold pool to close the pores. But there were no chemical filters and no chlorine. Thousands of oil-covered sweaty citizens, many carrying communicable illnesses, were cycling through the exact same lukewarm pools every single day. The famous Roman physician Celsus practically begged people not to go to the baths with open wounds because the water was such a thick soup of bacteria that it was basically a fast track to gangrene. Number 2. Latrine demons and the sponge. If you thought the baths were a microbiological nightmare, welcome to the public latrines. Privacy did not exist in the Roman bathroom. You sat shoulder to shoulder with 20 strangers discussing politics or business deals over a continuous stream of running water. And that running water? It was often the dirty, gray water runoff piped directly in from the public baths next door. Going to the bathroom in Rome was actually terrifying. The sewer system beneath these latrines, known as the Cloaca Maxima, was a dark, unventilated labyrinth. Because it was essentially an open dumping ground for butchers, tanners, and human waste, methane and hydrogen sulfide gases would rapidly build up. Without modern plumbing P-traps to block those fumes from rising back up the pipes, Roman toilets would sometimes literally explode, shooting flames right up through the stone seats. It was so dangerous, and the sounds bubbling up from the darkness were so unsettling that Romans believed evil demons lived in the sewers. You will frequently find shrines to Fortuna, the goddess of luck, painted on the walls of Roman bathrooms. They were literally praying for survival just to use the restroom. But let's talk about the elephant in the room: toilet paper. It didn't exist in the West yet. So, what did the Romans use? Enter the tersorium, also known as the xylospongium. It was a natural sea sponge attached to a wooden stick, but you didn't bring your own. The tersorium was community property. When you finished doing your business, you rinsed the sponge in a shallow gutter of dirty bathwater at your feet, maybe dipped it in a bucket of vinegar or salt water to disinfect it, and left it on the bench for the next guy to use. It was the ultimate superspreader event for the exact parasites archaeologists are finding today. Number 3. The historical silence. Alright, so we've mapped out the explosive toilets. We've scraped off the sweaty bath oil. We know exactly how Roman men lived, washed, wiped, and died. But wait a minute. This empire lasted for over 1,000 years and spanned 3 continents. Millions of women lived, built, and survived in this society. Which brings up a massive anthropological mystery. How did half the population handle menstruation in a world without modern sanitation? If you look for the answer in the official Roman historical texts, you will find absolutely nothing useful. The male historians of Rome wrote endlessly about war, architecture, and aqueducts, but they treated the female biological cycle as terrifying dark magic. The Roman author Pliny the Elder wrote about it extensively in his Natural History, and his claims are completely unhinged. He wrote that a menstruating woman could kill crops just by walking past them, turn wine sour, rust iron, and bronze with her mere presence, drive dogs entirely mad, and cause a swarm of bees to instantly die just by looking at the hive. Because the written record is completely obscured by male superstition and fear, anthropologists have had to play detective to figure out the truth of how women actually managed their hygiene. Number 4. The anthropological reality of the period. Since Roman women couldn't run to the local pharmacy for supplies, they had to be incredibly resourceful with the agricultural materials around them. How they handled this often depended entirely on their social class. For the vast majority of women, the most ubiquitous solution was linen. Linen, derived from the flax plant, was the everyday textile of the ancient Mediterranean. Women would take scraps of old linen garments, fold them into highly absorbent, structured, and layered pads. Because linen is famously tough, these pads could be thoroughly soaked, washed, dried in the harsh Italian sun, and reused indefinitely. Wealthy patrician women likely had enslaved attendants whose sole job was to constantly wash and prepare these linen garments in private quarters. But for poorer plebeian women living in cramped multi-story apartment blocks called insulae, washing and drying these items was just another grueling household chore added to cooking and childcare, often done quietly to avoid drawing attention to a deeply stigmatized bodily function. But they had other options too. Soft, unspun wool, known as lana, was cheap, abundant, and incredibly absorbent. Anthropologists and textile historians believe women likely fashioned raw wool into rudimentary tampons or used it as external padding. Furthermore, those same natural sea sponges used in the baths were incredibly versatile. It's highly probable that women cut fresh Mediterranean sponges down, cleaned them thoroughly, and used them internally. To keep everything secure, they wore a garment called a sublegaculum. We've actually found surviving examples of these, like the famous leather bikini bottoms excavated from Roman London. They functioned exactly like early underwear, tying around the waist to hold linen or wool firmly in place beneath their long flowing tunics, allowing them to go about their daily lives, run businesses, and manage households despite the utter lack of modern plumbing. The ancient Romans were true masters of engineering, but their daily hygiene was a chaotic collision of brilliant infrastructure and biological nightmares. While they absolutely laid the groundwork for modern plumbing, their daily habits proved that just because you have running water doesn't mean you're actually clean. The next time you turn on your shower or unroll a fresh square of toilet paper, take a second to thank the universe that you don't have to share a sponge on a stick with your neighbors.